Larry Poppy or Popey. If man, I'm going to need pronunciation guidance from you folks from that one. If because I don't want to insult anybody. If you take questions from here, which I do, how do you approach stories depending on the age of the target audience? How differently do you write for children, teenagers, and adults? How do you balance things like violence? I used to read stuff like Marvel Knights, Spider-Man by Mark Miller, I'm sorry, when I was 9, and Battle Royale when I was 12, and I liked the violence and intensity of those stories. Well, my target audience when I was writing mainstream superhero comics was always a precocious 10-year-old. See that kid all the way on the right? That's a precocious kid. He's looking at glamour. The rest of the kids are looking at comics. He's checking out the chick on the cover. I wrote for a precocious 10-year-old, and I never pandered. That's the thing. I don't understand when I say we're going to do comics for kids and they're simplistic and boring and flat. Well, why would kids be interested in this? When I was a kid, I was reading Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. I was reading Creepy magazine when I was a kid. I didn't need someone to dumb the comics down for me. And here's what I'm going to tell you. If you are writing for kids, kids are a tough audience. Kids are the toughest audience you will ever encounter. You know why? Because kids are only interested in story. They are only interested in what happens next. When a kid asks you to tell him a story, it better be a damn good story. And it's not about his attention span. Kids have an enormous attention span. When I was a kid, I could spend an entire afternoon, looking at ants. You know, that's a misnomer that kids don't want to be bored, and you can't BS them. You can't just write, you know, some clever little thing with lots of arch dialogue and pithy comments and asides and expect a kid to be entertained. No, stuff has to happen. It's got to have a plot. It's got to have a story. It's got to have interesting characters and resolution. And that's why most Netflix fare doesn't entertain a child, because it's a lot of nonsense. It's a lot of one damn thing after another, and it's not a story. So, a lot of times when I wrote, particularly when I was writing The Punisher, I would write on two levels. I would write on a level for the kids reading it and a level for the adults reading it. And mostly for the adults reading it, it was the humor. It was the Punisher's, you know, frankness in his own narration that I drew the humor from. Now, a kid's going to read that straight. It's going to read that dramatic and straight. An adult is going to realize, oh, this is funny because what he's saying in the captions juxtaposes to the visuals, things like that. So you could write on two levels. And I was always, writing for the Comics Code, never a problem for me. I didn't mind it. I didn't see the Comics Code as a restriction. I saw it as a challenge. And, I want to write a comic that's universally accepted, that parents don't mind their kids reading. And so, sometimes I would deal with what was considered edgy or topical subjects, but I dealt with them in such a way as that it was the story. It wasn't telling the kid what to think. I was not about indoctrinating children to believe anything. I just wanted them to have a good time reading the story. Often, the only reason I would include issues or topical stuff is because a lot of the stuff they were dealing with in their own lives. And it seemed disingenuous, particularly in the case of Robin, to be writing about a teenage character who didn't have any teenage problems, the kind of problems teenagers had now, not the kind of problems Archie Andrews had in the 50s, but, guns at school, drugs, date rape, things like that. But dealing with it within the confines of the Comics Code, I had no problem with it. I had no problem with that at all. I thought it made the comic book stories better, that I was trying to appeal to a more universal audience. And you do that without pandering. And I was in children's books, and let me tell you, plotting a children's book, that is no picnic. That is no afternoon in the sunshine. That is hard work because you got to test it on kids, every step of the way. You got to read it out loud. If you've ever read to kids, you'll know what I'm talking about. You know what books interest them and what books lose them entirely. So there you go. Yeah, I'm with you. Uh, just write comics that appeal to kids. Don't write comics aimed at kids.